Last Night of Freedom follows four friends from university who 15 years later go on a stag party up to a remote part of the Lake District, which is a beautiful part of northern Britain. Whilst they're there, they encounter another stag party of locals. There's a bit of kind of one-upmanship, and then at that point it's revealed that they're kind of trapped there for this reason, in that the locals have a tradition in which, in order to be deemed worthy of your bride, the groom and his friends must hunt and kill other men and present somebody as a trophy for their wife. So they're told at the start, out of the four of them, that three of them will not make it home, but one of them will, for reasons which are revealed as we work our way through the blood and the screaming that is Last Night of Freedom.
So there's a couple ways I thought that I could start this conversation. The first thing is, as far as like books that I've interacted with from you, it's been a little bit, and I was looking up because back when I did the podcast Booked, we talked about The Hyde Hotel, which is an anthology that you edited, I believe, back in 2019, and so it's been since then since I got into reading something of yours. And when I saw you post images of this book, I was like, oh, this looks fucking great. Like, so let's start there. Let's start with the cover image is fucking fantastic. And it really kind of advertises what you're in for in a way. So can you tell me about how you came about getting this cover design and what, like how you feel about it?
I think the best thing that you can do as an author is to, if you're independently putting your books out there, and if you're responsible for either sourcing or in some cases creating your own art, the best thing that you can do, or certainly what I do, is when I'm normally about halfway through a book, I'll start to kind of think of images that I can put in place that will summarize the mood and keep the mood in mind for me as I'm writing it. And that often helps me through some of kind of middle bit of writing a book when it can get a bit flabby and it can feel a bit difficult. And the image on the cover, so the kind of this stag part here, I'd kind of found online, and I was like, it's about a stag party or a bachelor party, as you call them in America. And I thought, well, I don't want it to be a live stag. I want to find something, that's mounted like you'd find in kind of a stately home over in England and those kind of things. So I always had that image in mind. Now, I'm really lucky that through another community, so I don't know if you've heard of the Other Stories podcast, which is like a story podcast. So I've written quite a few stories for them. So's Michael Wilson, Kev Harrison, a lot of other writers that I know. It's run by a couple of guys, Luke Condor and Dan Wilcox. It's a great fiction podcast. And through there, I've met a whole bunch of other writers and creators of various things. One of them is a guy called Paul Stevenson, who's also a very good author in his own right. And he did the cover for Territory for me, which was my novella before this. And he knew really when we were kind of sitting down to discuss this, he knows that I'm a big fan of a British writer called David Peace. I don't know if you're familiar with him. No. But he did a quartet of books called the Red Riding Quartet, and they all had a very similar kind of look to them. So his name at the top with the title, and then there's kind of a framing device, and each book in the quartet has kind of a different main colour. So they all look broadly the same, except they've got a different central image in a different colour, which helps to distinguish each book from the next. And he knew that I was a fan, and he just kind of came to me and said, well, look at this. We could effectively brand you as an author. So, how do you feel about this? So we kind of meshed that image that I had with this kind of David Peace style cover design. And it came out great. The next book is kind of in this vein. So it's got the same framing device. It's blue. It's called Lion Hearts with a big picture of the lion on the front. Equally striking. And also now, hopefully, kind of identifiable as definitely one of my books, which I think is really useful. It's hard to stand out. So if you can have that kind of brand recognition and almost be known or be recognized in any way when people are looking at book covers, it's got to be to your advantage. So I can't take a huge amount of the credit for it, but I will willingly heap it onto Paul because he is absolutely brilliant at what he does.
Yeah, it's definitely it's striking, and I'm trying to think of the word. It just looks I don't know. It's not. It's got a like a I don't know. Anyway, it's a very good. People who are watching this on YouTube can see the cover right now, so you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It looks like yeah, like it's just got a very good design to it. And so the Red Writing thing, did that get adapted into like a short, like a mini series? Because I feel like
yeah, it
I
did. And it's
watched
got like
that.
an amazing cast, like Sean Bean, Andrew Garfield, Paddy Considine, like some real like cream of the crop kind of British actors in
Yeah,
there. It's I mean the books are they're so intense. They're a real lesson in kind of writing. And I went to an event with him on Sunday. Actually, he lives in Japan, so he doesn't do many UK based events. And he came over and he read from his book, and it's almost like that kind of Elmore Leonard, kind of James Elroy, that kind of style.
yeah,
When you hear it read out loud, you're just like, this just all makes sense.
yeah.
Really good books. Highly recommended.
That's cool. I didn't realize that came from a book or a series of books. But yeah, like I remember watching that kind of closer to when it came out and thinking, man, man, that's the
Yeah.
best I can say about that.
Yeah, it leaves its mark on you, it's fair to say.
I just had kind of a thought that we could do a minor digression before diving deep into your book, which is,
Sure.
I mentioned that I had read The Hyde Hotel a few years ago, but I guess I didn't explain that we've known each other a bit longer than that because of your original. Why am I not? It's fucking morning for me. Anybody who's listening to this, so like that's why like words don't make sense to me. But like your involvement with This Is Horror, the podcast, is how I first met you. Back in the early 2010s, I think. That sounds right, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I kind of got to know Michael, who runs This Is Horror, about 2009, perhaps, something like that. And then that kind of ended up morphing into the podcast about 2012, 2011, something like that. When it started off as me and Michael for a while. We had a good number of years doing that. And then 2016, I became a dad and just couldn't be getting up at crazy o'clock to interview people, really. Michael was living in Japan, a lot of guests in America.
Yeah.
I had to step back from that. I do miss it. It's getting together and chatting with people about books, as you'll know, Rob, is like good way to spend your time. So that's kind of how we first knew each other. And I was trying to think back to kind of the last time we podcasted together, other than the booked episode, and I think it would have been me, you, and Livius with Michael as well. Maybe talking about like Hannibal or something
there was
like that.
Hannibal
like one of the crossover episodes. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. You were on for when my anthology was talked about, right? Or no? Was that
no? I don't think I was. I think it was. I think John Costello.
John.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. But we did several podcasts together back in the days where people didn't really understand what a podcast was. So
it's a testament
wild
to Michael for keeping it going, and to yourself as well, because it's a big commitment. It's fun, but it's a hell of a lot of work for people. So fair play to you for sticking it out. It's a big achievement.
Well, thank you. To me, I feel the same way about writing books. So, I guess kind of the same thing toward you. Like the fact that you have put out multiple books to me is just like, oh man, the amount of effort, the amount of time that goes into that feels kind of insurmountable. So, I guess you haven't taken yourself off the hook, I guess.
No, I think I've just poured that time into books. I mean, this is like Last Night of Freedom is the first novel that's come out. I've got a novella and a short story collection, but I'm sitting on like probably 5, 6 novels that
Wow.
are not far off good to go in some cases. Yeah, it's been a lot of work over the last 8 years or whatever. Really, it's an
That's
obsession.
fantastic. Yeah. Well, so I guess now we can go into this book because I really enjoyed Last Night of Freedom, and that like it inspired me to ask questions I usually don't ask, which is not a bad thing.
Okay.
It's just it's interesting. So the general anybody who's listening to this, you heard the very beginning where Dan explained what the book is about, but there was like there's a real feel to it because it's ostensibly a group of like friends who are more city folk kind of people going out into this kind of rural setting to party and do the whole bachelor party stag party thing. And so there's a real feel for this kind of country setting and everything. And so I never asked this question, and it seems so like cliched and everything, but like, where was the inspiration for this setting? Because you made it feel really lived in. So is it something that you're familiar with just from living around areas like that, or something? Where was how did you get the setting for this?
I've always been a big fan of the country. Like where I live is kind of semi-rural, I guess, to some extent. Like where I am, you're talking like. So I live on the Wirral, which is part of Merseyside, kind of opposite Liverpool, so over the river from there. And there's the good thing about it is you're never more than about 10 minutes away from a beach or from
Mm.
a wood or something where you can kind of go for a bit of a walk, and then you can drop down into Wales where it's a lot less populated. Um, a lot of the genesis from it, the pub where a lot of it takes place, in my mind, is the pub that I grew up drinking in. So I used to live in a village in Cheshire. And I can say all this now because the pub has been knocked down and they've made it to houses and stuff. But where we were, we could walk like 15 minutes, and it was kind of a country pub that was never busy at all. So we kind of
Hmm.
started drinking in there at like 15. The legal age for drinking is 18 over here, which is obviously much less than America. We've been drinking in there for so long. By the time we all turned 18, we had to tell them we were turning 21. They knew us all by name. And it was such a strange little place. When you first went into it, people would turn and look at you like, "Who's this guy? Like,
Hmm.
what are these guys doing in here?" But after a while, they would come to accept you, and then you'd find that you would do the same. So you'd have been drinking in there for a few weeks or months, and then somebody new would come in, and you'd join in. Like, who the hell is this guy that's come in now? So that was always in my mind. That was, those were formative years for me, and formative experiences with alcohol, which we probably won't get into if this is going to be on YouTube. But yeah, so that was kind of always in my mind. That pub, I wanted to immortalize it in my own mind. R.I.P. to the Elms, the pub. Um, she was a good old girl. But yeah, a lot of it comes from being kind of interested in the countryside, and we take a kind of a lot of holidays in more remote places. So we've recently been down to like Cambridgeshire, which is quite a flat, kind of odd place. There's a lot of fens and kind of very flat, grassy areas, and there are kind of places there where you can just go and not see people really, which
Yeah.
in a country like ours is quite rare. I imagine I've driven across America. It's quite easy to not have to see anybody in that country, but
Yes.
places like that in England are few and far between. So that was on my mind, and then the Lake District is a kind of part of the world that I love anyway. So I thought, well, if we set it in one of the less kind of celebrated areas of that, we can, I'm familiar with it. I can write more about that setting with confidence, and just kind of mesh those kind of two or three different elements together to create something that hopefully people find quite unsettling.
Well, I did.
Good.
So, um, cool. Yeah, because it definitely um, it felt like something that you were familiar with. Like it came from you were writing from experience to a degree. So, and then one of the big, and I read your author's notes, so I already kind of know the answer to this, but the whole story is about bachelor party in a part of the country that they are not from, so they're the outsiders, and they
Mm.
encounter a local bachelor party, and it's just really like a bunch of obnoxious dudes, before like the real story sets in. And so in your author's note, you do kind of actually, you know what? I think even your dedication, hang on, unless you
Yeah,
just know it off the top of your head. The
I do sadly.
dedication is okay. So yeah, what's the dedication really quick?
For all the lads out there, grow up.
Yeah.
It's
So
yeah, yeah.
it's not a subtle thing that at least part of the driving force of you writing this story is just like, oh man, like guys can be such obnoxious like douchebags or whatever. So was that like a strong inspiration for that part of the story? Like, was there an inciting incident, or was it just kind of a general observation?
I had the idea for this for quite a long time. When me and my wife first got together, we spent probably 2 years, I think, and it felt like we were on a wedding or a stag party or a hen party, like every other weekend. Um, and I don't know if you've ever been on many stag parties or bachelor parties, as you call them,
Yeah.
but they vary wildly in terms of quality of human you can spend your time with and the quality of place that you can end up in. And I find there's something really unsettling about them in many ways. Now, I've been on many good ones, and they're usually, the ones of close friends who I know well, and I know there's going to be like no trouble and no kind of oddballs or, people that you can't kind of get on with.
Yeah.
But I've been on a few, and you just think this has really got the potential to just be truly awful.
Hmm.
There was one that I went to, so we all shipped out to Bratislava in Eastern Europe. It's
Oh
not
wow.
somewhere
Okay.
I would have chosen to go. And a couple of us who were like really good friends, we got there early and we hit up like some local breweries. We had a bit of kind of local cuisine and all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of like a nice day out in a foreign city with your friends. And then everybody else arrived in like the evening, and it just rapidly went downhill. Now,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of those places are chosen because they have easy access to, women who will take their clothes off for money or, whatever it is that the particular stag is into. And I've
Hmm.
never enjoyed those particular things. And there's a lot of pressure in those situations of, oh, right, well, going to strippers now. And it's like, well, I've got a partner back home who I'm faithful
Yeah.
to. Like I don't
Right.
want to go and do that. And that peer pressure is relentless. And you almost like people almost try and make you feel embarrassed for being decent in some of those situations.
Yeah.
But the one thing that really kind of sticks in my mind about this particular one was we went to a shooting range, right? Now
Uh-huh.
in England, and there's going to be people I can hear them clicking to turn off as soon as I say this, but guns are very alien to us. Like it's different in America. It's part of your culture. It's not for us. They're
Hmm.
strange foreign objects. You see them in museums or on demonstration days. Military history stuff. You don't see a gun in your day to day life. So we went to a shooting range, and they get out these like automatic rifles, and then like it's just drill them into this target. And some people really enjoyed it, and a few of us were just like, oh god, like it was a really strange feeling to be in a
Yeah.
situation of almost being made to fire a gun and have other blokes cheer you on while you did it. But part of me kind of thought, well, and I didn't do this obviously because I'm here talking to you, but I did kind of think, well, what's to stop somebody if there's a grudge or whatever on this stag do, or somebody's had too much to drink, turn around in another direction? And yeah, that kind of stuck with me as it might do. And then later that evening, I saw some people who had known for many years get drunk and start a fight with a bouncer. The bouncer ended the fight extremely swiftly, if you follow my meaning. And I just thought this is such a bizarre thing to have to do with your time. Like you feel bad. Somebody invites you on one of these things, and then basically in their honor, you're forced to do things that you don't want to do. It's an odd tradition, and that always stuck with me, like from that trip onwards, really. And that was probably 10 years ago now. So yeah, it's been
Yeah.
gestating for a while, and I think it kind of all came out in this book.
Well, I have been best man in 6 different weddings. I've been best man 6 times.
6.
Yeah, and so
Jesus.
that means that, and that's just the ones where I was best man. I've been groomsman at least 1 or 2 other times,
Oh my God, Rob.
and so like, yeah, I've had to do that shit a lot,
Yeah.
and most of the time I deferred the planning of those things off to other people just because it seems so, because
Yeah.
like, yeah, there's a formula. It's there needs to be alcohol, there needs to
Yep.
be um naked women usually,
Yep.
they're like yeah, and it's just not something that is natural for me to
No.
approach. And so I've always just kind of been like, oh, this person seems like they're really, keyed into how to do this, and so I would just kind of defer it off to one of the other groomsmen. um so yeah, like when I saw the premise of this book, I was like, ooh, I want to see where this goes. It
Yeah,
is,
it's
you're absolutely right. Like, it's just such a weird position to be put in, and like it's not something that ever happens other a different time in the front. It's not like, once a year we go off and we shoot guns and look at, and go to the strip club or whatever. It's not a part of that kind of core
no.
friendship ever. So yeah.
No, it's really really weird. I mean, I must admit, I'm slightly irked now that you've said that, Rob, because I've been best man at 3 weddings, and I've never met anybody who's done more than that. So, yeah, I can't
I
believe
doubled
it.
you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, unbelievable. I've just been absolutely crushed.
Well,
Um,
and my joke is I've been best man at 6 weddings for 5 people. So
oh really? Yeah. Less said about the repeat subscriber, the better maybe. I don't
moving away from my, absolute like best man prowess,
know.
obviously one of the things that you explore in here is, because we've been talking about it kind of tangentially, but like is really long-term friendships. And so I've got, and not everybody has this, but like in my life, and the reason I've been a best man that many times is that I'm still close friends with people that I, was in like school with, when I was in like the third
Yeah.
grade, or when we were like 8 years old. I think I met, like this core group of friends that I still connect with. And so that's kind of what's going on in this story too. The four, I guess, the protagonist party, those four folks are longtime friends too. So it gives you an opportunity to explore not just friendship, but like the evolution of friendship over time. So, um, is that something that's inspired from personal stuff? Or, because I mean, I got to imagine we've all got, especially at the age that I'm 46 today. I,
Congratulations, happy birthday.
I know, just like trying to get people to tell me happy birthday. But I can look back at a person that I've known for, I don't want to do the math, 28 years or whatever. So was there any personal stuff going on, you reflecting with like just how friendships evolve over time to this?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a strange concept to think about. I mean, I'm lucky, well, or unlucky, depending on whether you meet some of these friends. But I've got one friend who I've known literally. I cannot remember a time I didn't know him.
Mm-hmm.
Our mums met at like a prenatal class
Okay.
and became friends. So I was born like 3 months before him. I literally can't remember ever not knowing him. So I'm 40 this year. So that's like nearly 40 years of friendship. And then most of my good friends I've met through school as well. So there's kind of a core group of about 6 or 7 of us who are in touch regularly. I see most of them pretty regularly, and they're like my core friendship group. I think one of the things that fed into this was though kind of the friends that slide in and out, the friends that are
Yeah.
kind of so important to you at one point in your life, but then not at that point afterwards. I don't know if you like went to university, for example, but you move away for a few years, and then
Mm-hmm.
the people that you live with and that you study with are like the most important people in your world for like 3, 4 years of your life. and then you all dissipate and get jobs in different places, and those friendships slide and ebb and flow. It's strange to think that I kind of graduated, God, nearly 20 years ago now. But like some of those people, I was so desperate to stay friends with them, and now I think can't even remember the last time I spoke to some of them.
Right.
So that kind of fleeting motion of your adult friendships, yeah, I think it did play into it, and I think every friendship has maybe its limit. Some are meant to be for life, and some just tide us over in moments when we need them. Maybe it's an interesting thing to reflect on. I must admit, I didn't really kind of think about that as one of the themes, but yeah, I think you've dug into something that I've written there. You've made me sound much more clever than I intended to be.
Well, I mean, obviously, like as a part of like character development and just like um, the situation that they're put in, where suddenly it's this group of people who are expecting a nice, fun weekend or whatever, and they're like running for their lives. Yeah, I think you would have naturally a situation where their relationships with each other are suddenly put under a microscope in different ways,
Yeah,
or things that are said, or like in the moment, since there's such, everything is so heightened. That guy
yeah,
doing that thing that guy always does is like, I can't fucking stand that thing. Like
yeah,
it's gonna like boil over because the pressure that's put on them overemphasizes the differences or the petty squabbles and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's interesting. Like I've seen it with kind of more tangential friendship groups than my main core friends than I would, as I would kind of describe them.
Mm-hmm.
We've been friends, my school friends. Some of them I met at like primary school when we were like
Yeah.
5 or 6 years old, and there's never been a cross word in like 30 odd years of friendship.
Mm-hmm.
you know but some friendship groups are tumultuous. They have those peaks and troughs. They have those hidden grudges and grievances, and I think it's interesting that you can be so wedded to like a friendship group, yet as soon as it becomes put under pressure, those cracks begin to show. And it's an interesting thought. You've got all these people that you've been best man for. If you were in a situation, if it's you or him, well, how good a
Yeah.
friend are you at that point? And those are often the jumping off points for stories that I like to write. So
Mm-hmm.
I've got a novel where it's effectively siblings kind of are put in a situation where they're trying to help and or hinder each other. And I just kind of thought, well, at what point could I push my sister to want to have me killed?
Yeah.
I'm fairly sure I've probably reached it in the past, but that was like the jumping off point for the story, and some of it kind of spilled out from there. And likewise, how far would you go to protect your friends in that situation if it meant you suffered as a result?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, who would you actually die for?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
It's easy to say I'd die for my friend. When you're presented with that opportunity, like it's a different story sometimes.
Exactly, and I think that's a really, that's just an interesting question to want to ask in a book.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah. Um, another thing I wanted to talk about is, so a little bit about the structure of the way the book is written is
Yep.
it's perspective chapters. So like each chapter is from the perspective of one of the four main people,
Yep.
the bachelor party, the protagonist party. Um, and so, and it's first person. So we're seeing it from their perspective. With the interesting exception, I don't know if people are noticing this, that there's two folks from the local guys bachelor party that are kind of the main people from that group. So there's Gav and there's Wallace, and there's a Gav, one or two Gav chapters where I noticed it's third person. So am I right?
Yeah.
I'm right about that, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's
So
right. Yeah, both Gav and
um,
Wallace are third person. Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah, there's a Wallace. There's Wallace too. And so I thought that was interesting, but what was the inspiration to do chapters from everybody's perspective.
I think it's like in terms of I've always I think I'd probably take it back to like George R. R. Martin and Game of Thrones. Really, I always thought it was really interesting the way that he told this huge. I mean, I say told. I think we can assume there's going to be no more books, but he told this
Yeah.
huge, multi-layered story across a spanning a huge continent from various perspectives, and I thought it was particularly interesting. So, like, you think about like the North and some of those characters up there, like Robb Stark is so central to that narrative for, at least half the story,
Hmm.
but you never get inside his head. You see it from his mother's point of view as she's trying to advise him. And I always thought it was interesting that you would get events in a story that are coloured by the perspective of who's telling them.
Yeah.
And there's various examples. There's like a book called Reservoir 13, I think it is, where people are recounting what happens during a murder, and you get little bits of information from every character, but
Hmm.
nobody's like telling you this is the definitive version. So I wanted to
Yeah.
give
Right.
you a bit
Right.
of like an insight as the reader into what's happening. So, for example, you'd see something that one character does, but then you'd see that kind of action described by somebody else and they'd put their slant on it, like, oh,
Yeah.
well, he's done that because of this, when in reality he hasn't, but that's his perspective has coloured the events. And I think that's a really interesting, well, hopefully a very interesting way to approach the narrative of having the events coloured by the perspective of the character who's telling it, but trying to do it from many angles.
Yeah. And I kept trying to tell myself that it was like the term Rashomon, where
Yeah,
it's like it's the same thing told from multiple perspectives, but it's not really exactly that. But every now and then there's like a little overlap of like
yeah,
the action described toward the end of one chapter kind of starts the next one a little bit. So like
yep,
there's that like kind of connective tissue between like let's say Jay's perspective moving on to like Ethan's or something like that. Um, so that was, and I kept telling myself, oh, a cool word, you can say Rashomon on this podcast, but it's not that, because it's not like creating like an unreliability of, well, I guess it kind of is in a way, but um, yeah, I thought that was kind of neat too. That like,
thanks. Yeah, I wanted to have a little bit of ambiguity in there between how everybody sees the events.
yeah,
So
hmm,
they line up, but like when I do DIY, it looks like it lines up, but it's always a couple of inches out. You know what I mean?
right,
It's never quite right. So
yeah,
yeah, I wanted to just create a little, almost an element of doubt maybe for the
yeah,
reader, and just a little bit more conflict by trying to tell it from multiple perspectives. Really, same with
yeah,
Gavin
but
Wallace. See it
yeah,
from their side too.
yeah, we'll talk about that. But like nice that it was just kind of a little handoff instead of like we see the entire thing told two different ways. Because you can kind of do the same thing without like boring us to death by telling the same exact beats of a story from like four perspectives or whatever. Yeah, it was a nice way to just keep it paced out well, I want to say.
Yeah, I always I tried to like not make the chapters too long and then just like intercut to somebody else. And I almost tried, like I'd been doing quite a bit of screenwriting at the time. I'm just trying to get those transitions almost between the
Right.
scenes to create kind of tension or conflict or whatever it is. You almost like don't want to change the perspective at the
Hmm.
point that you do as the reader, and that helps to create some tension. Hopefully,
Yeah, I did feel like it would be very almost like a cinematic approach to writing. So I'm glad that you were saying that. Um, but so the concept of the story is that we haven't really approached yet, but I'm sure that but it's not a spoiler or anything. Is that once the outsider guy's bachelor party, our perspective finds out the stakes of what's really going on. It's that the local bachelor party folks are going to hunt this group down, and only one of them gets to survive. It's on the fucking cover. It's not a spoiler.
yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
so once they kind of figure this out, um, it occurred to me that there's probably a reason that you didn't name the chapters by the um, person whose perspective it is, because like anybody who figures that out early in the book can just go and look at the chapter names
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
whose perspective isn't around ananymore. So did you
The
bump
first
into
thing
that
I
at some
did
point?
when I was formatting it was make sure there was no contents page,
Mm-hmm.
because that
Yeah.
would have totally undone any of it. I mean, yeah. But yeah, it's you gotta make sure that there's some element of mystery.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of who survives, somebody asked me when they were like beta reading it, and they kind of got halfway through, and they were like, "Well, why does one person survive? Why not just kill them all?" And I try to explain that towards the end once the individual who
Right.
does make it home. Um, you know, I feel that it hopefully lends some legitimacy to what was being done up there and why.
Right. Yep.
So
That is something that you do explore, is the motivations of these locals who have this kind of twisted tradition. So on their side, for generations, we find out pretty early in the story, so this isn't spoiling anything. I don't believe. You can shut me up if you want me to.
no, we're all good. We're all good.
For generations, there's been this tradition of when someone is engaged to be married, um, they have this hunt of a group of outsiders, and that's kind of the rite of passage of the groom is to go on this hunt and get their kill or whatever. And the see, now I have to dance around spoilers because the thing I'm thinking about is what the conversations that happen at the end. Um, yeah, how did you was that how did you conceive of this kind of rural tradition as being part of it?
Well, ultimately, and I'm almost certain I found this in research and haven't made it up, but the original kind of genesis for a stag party would be that, say I was getting married, I would take you and all my buddies, and we would go for the night out into the woods, and we would find a deer or a stag or
Mm,
whatever it was in this case, kill it and eat it together. And that was like the bonding process of us, killing our food, sitting around the fire, last night of freedom, your last, weekend, your last night as kind of a single man. And that was the tradition, going back a few hundred years or however long ago it was that people were into this. I just thought, well, that could be really interesting if people have to try and kind of almost prove themselves worthy to be married to somebody by, effectively committing this atrocious act of hunting somebody down and killing them to prove that they're worthy. And I think there's something in that. How many times do you see it in a film or in a book or whatever? Oh, I'd die for you. I'd kill for you.
yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, prove it. So I guess that was my kind of sick little take on it, I suppose.
Well, yeah, because that comes up from now, like, so it's a challenge to both sides of the equation in your book. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
the "I die for you" thing that we were talking about earlier with
yeah,
the outsiders group of bachelor party people, stag party, sorry. Um, and then now, but also from the locals whose tradition it is, like, you like have to, this is part of it, like this is, in order for you to get married, you have to do this thing. Do you have the wherewithal to actually make it happen? And so a couple of thoughts come out of that. First of all, um, for the perspective of the locals, like they know what they're in for and they know the stakes and everything. So things are almost a little bit tipped in their favor because they understand what the potential outcomes are, and that can like push their actions a little bit more. Like it can kind of give them momentum to do the thing. The outsider folks rightfully probably think this is a joke. This is a sick joke. These guys are just weird or whatever, and they don't understand really what's at stake. Um, but it gives you an opportunity to do an analysis of like how far would you go? And so, I don't know if there's a question there, but like, what are your thoughts on that? Like the analyzing the idea of how far would you go for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, of all the reactions in the book and in terms of the events and the way that the different characters kind of relate to them, I think probably the bit where I thought this is the most honest piece of writing is kind of after there's a confrontation in the pub where the locals say this is what's going to happen, and they kind of the protagonists that we're following go outside and they're told you've got 1 hour and then we're going to come after you and only one of you will go home alive. And they all kind of run from the pub and they're running down the road. And after a while, one of them stops and just bursts out laughing.
Yeah.
And he's like, that was fucking hilarious. That was like the best joke ever. Like, can you believe they've got that gun, that blank firing gun, all that kind of stuff. And I thought that's probably the most genuine
Yeah.
reaction that I would have had, because it did seem like that. And then I suppose when they go to the next place and they realize, yes, it is actually true, then you kind of have to start cranking it up from that point. But I did think, at this point, to make this realistic, somebody's got to try and laugh this off, because I think that would be my first reaction as well, is, these lads, they're having us on, look at that lot. But in reality, there are very few jokes to be had in this, unfortunately. And from there we start to crank up the tension. I think I may have lost sight of your question in there as well.
No, I think it was the whole idea of like analyzing the how far would you go kind of question, and I think you got there. Yeah, you definitely.
Yeah.
Because there's like an element of disbelief of like there's no way that this could actually be real life. But there is that moment, kind of like, so they find out, they're told what they need to do. They leave the pub, and then not long after that is when reality sets in. And when reality sets in, I was like, oh, this is going to be. So I was like, here we go. Like there was an actual feeling of like he's really fucking doing this, and this is going to get really nasty. So there was an actual point in the story where I was like, it's on, where it turns into a chase, like instead of just the threat of a chase. Which makes me think, like, then how do you what's your process for making sure that you maintain the tension of that situation? Because it's nonstop fucking scare after that, terror after that.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge was, I mean, like when I had the idea, I knew how it was going to end, and that's usually how I start writing something. I'll have how it's going to start, a kind of tentpole plot point in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and then how it's going to end. And without those three, and without some knowledge of their characters, it would be a struggle to get going. So once I have those three, I'm okay. It kind of got to the point where I thought, well, ultimately they're going to have to be chased. Now, they don't know the terrain. The other guys have got guns. They know the area. They're more equipped. It was about finding ways in which you can give these people some hope, whilst also ensuring that it is snatched away. And the tension, everybody's got a plan until they're punched in the face or whatever, as the kind of thing goes. So, the best laid plans, the best ideas seem good until you realize that you're not in control of this situation. And actually, these people are professionals to a point. They've done this before. They don't lose this game.
Right.
And I think there comes a point, after the first of them kind of gets dealt with, that it becomes clear to all of the characters that actually, they were told only one of them would go home. And I think up until that point, they think, nah, we all will, and we'll work together. And I think after that is the point where, the kind of rifts in the friendship, the kind of that need for survivalism and individuality, and your own fight or flight instinct kicks in, and before you know it, you're turning on people, and yeah, all the plans of cooperation are out the window. It is just these people are coming. They're coming for me, and I'm
Yeah.
in charge of my own destiny here. So yeah, I reverse engineered it, and then had to kind of go back and just make sure that all right, okay, if I crank it up here, I can push them in this direction and see where they get to once this happens.
I like how you said giving them hope and then snatching it away. I think that yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
Sure.
So they're in this chase and everything. There's a hope. There's a moment of hope, like you just mentioned, where they see a light in the distance, and so it's like a farmhouse or whatever. And something happens where when they get close enough to the farmhouse, they see something that kind of tells them the gravity of the situation. Like it shows them how like fucked they are in a way, and that was a
Yeah.
real, probably like one of the more like macabre moments of the thing where you describe what the person sees. And like a lot of this story is like really kind of like rural crime, rural thriller, but that moment was very horror. I guess
Yeah.
is the way that I'll say that. And yeah, I thought that was really effective, and then it painted a very vivid image in my head. So I don't know how much you want to say about that, but that moment where someone sees something in the farmhouse was a very effective, like, this is how fucking real the situation is and how twisted it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes down to like traditions, really. And traditions I find absolutely fascinating. Not just like rituals, not talking about like the Wicker Man, but like kind of history and some of that pastoral kind of country living and why people do the things that they do. Um, and I thought, this won't be complete without a nod to this tradition, some way to acknowledge that this isn't just a couple of crackpots in the pub who subscribe to this, but this is a belief system. This is people's way of life, and I think there's one of the horrors of that moment is the fact that all of these people in the book who, well, not the four protagonists who we are kind of with, but everybody else in the local area, they live their lives with this tradition almost hanging over them. You're brought up as a young boy or girl in that area, and you meet somebody and fall in love with them. You know that you're heading for that moment whereby
Yeah.
somebody you have to kill or somebody has to kill for you. And I just thought, well, surely somebody would rebel against that. But then you kind of look at some of the traditions that we have across various countries, and I don't know, people are kind of brought up and aren't really taught any better,
Yeah.
or they're so ingrained in their way of life that nobody would think to question them. And I think that is a really interesting thing to think about, and also, a question to pose as to, we've all got things that we believe in. Every country, every region, every town has its own kind of identity. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what if the identity of this place hasn't moved on any further in the last few hundred years? Are people prepared to challenge that, or do they just accept it for what it is and enjoy the fact that they live in a beautiful, if slightly very fucked up part of the world? So those are some of the questions that I kind of wanted to ask, really.
Is there
Sure.
anything we have not kind of discussed yet that you wanted to talk about the book? Because I feel like I've touched on the big things that like I observed or like took away as a reader. But is there any other like tidbits or things like that that you think are important to talk about with this book?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I kind of had in mind when I was writing it was just the comment on just the general obnoxiousness of men. To be honest, that was that was my main thing. So I think we covered quite a bit of that within the stag party element. I mean, to be honest, I've had a couple of reviews in which have been good, but I'm wondering, how long it's going to be before somebody goes, well, hold on, guy, where are all the women in this story? You know, It is a bit of a sausage fest, but you know, it's awful men, but awful things happen to most of them. So, to my mind,
Yeah.
that's fair. That's fair game.
Yeah, and it's I didn't feel that once, so I'm sure you'll have those people, but that's not what the story's for. I think.
No, I
Um,
think anything that shines a light on what a bizarre and at times complicated species we can be is a good thing. And by that I mean, I do mean men. I think whilst a lot of us are quite dim, we they certainly always have reasons for believing they're doing the right thing, and I think it's interesting to test that in fiction, really, because I think a lot of the people who are doing awful stuff out there, when you think about bad male role models like Andrew Tate and all those
yeah,
ball bags, are, they'll never question what they're doing. They'll never ask why they're doing what they're doing or if there's any negativity behind it. So, as somebody who doesn't subscribe to that way of living or to those views, I think it's important to be able to, shine a light on some of those things and say, well, yeah, these are wrong and we can do better and we should. Hopefully people will come away and go, yeah, we can all move forward and be a bit better than we are being.
one thing that I thought a few times as I was reading this book, and I'm gonna preface this by saying this book does not need to be anything else because it is the story that it needs to be. But in my mind, because there is a mystery of what's going to happen, who's going to do what, it is
Yep.
like you slowly reveal more and more information. So then in my mind, I'm trying to guess what happens, and I'm trying to guess what happens, and but it gave me the opportunity a couple of times to think like, well, what if like one of these outsider people was just a total maniac, and like it was the locals who didn't know what they were in for. So that was just my mind having fun with the situation. Obviously, like I love the story that you told, but every now and then I had this thought of like, well, what if suddenly this group of locals didn't, didn't realize what they were in for, and like someone just kind of like goes nuts on them. So there's not a
Yeah,
question there, but like, yeah, I thought it was kind of fun to do that little thought exercise as I was reading.
I did. I must admit, this was something that I wrestled with because I thought, well, what if one of the, this is why I mentioned at one point that they've almost been vetted to be there.
Yep. Yep.
So one of the characters is a cop, but over here, being a cop, they're good at fighting, but they're not like it's not like combat skills. There's no shooting involved or very little involved being a cop over here. Because I'd thought, well, what if one of these guys was like an ex SAS commando or something, and they didn't know? All of a sudden, it turns the other way around, and he's hunting them. So I thought, well,
Mm-hmm.
I need to ensure that they're vetted. I see them all as very white collar, impractical people who have no experience really in nature. And I think that what you've just described would be the sequel.
Yeah, for sure. But no,
Yeah.
you covered that base. Like you saw me coming and you were like, no, Rob, this is what's
Yeah.
going on. So
There's always one smart ass. So
yeah,
yeah,
I'm the
I'm glad it.
smartest.
I'm glad it was you, Rob.
But yeah, that was well done. But like, yeah, it did create this whole like, what the fuck is going to happen kind of thing in the reader's mind as you go through it. So,
Oh, that's
you
good
know,
to
weirdos fill in the blanks, but the story
hear.
played out so well. Let's talk about what else is coming up. So this is, I didn't write the fucking release date. It's like a week away or 2 weeks away.
It's this Friday, so as we speak,
Okay.
we're on the 8th. Obviously, as you know, because you were born. It's Friday, the 11th of October. It's out. So by the time people are seeing and hearing this, they'll be able to buy it. You can buy it from Amazon, or you can come to me directly, and I'm sure there'll be links knocking around on social media and stuff like that, whereby you can buy it from me without the corporate filth of Amazon getting its hands on it. So.
And same release date in the United States as anywhere else.
Yeah, that's correct. And there is
Okay.
an audiobook coming. It's going through QC currently, so I don't think it'll be live on release date,
Mm-hmm.
but it shouldn't be too far after.
Oh, that would be interesting hearing this as an audiobook. Huh.
Yeah,
Have you heard any
the
of it?
narrator. Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. So Aubrey Parsons has done it, who did
Oh, cool.
the Autumn trilogy for David Moody, did House Bad Memories for Michael Wilson. And he's done a great job. You know, everybody's got their own unique voice. It's really well done, and
That's
I really
awesome.
hope that people get around to checking that out because he's put a lot of good work in it, and it's rightly one he should be really proud of.
Awesome. And then what's coming up next? You got is it Lion Hearts?
Yeah,
Did I get
that's
that right?
right. So that one's ready to go. It's had a few near misses with publishers and agents and stuff. It's got me to second places in a number of competitions. So its time is right in 2025. So that'll probably be about March, April time. And that's
Very
kind
cool.
of This Is England meets Taxi Driver. So it's a kind of a guy. So it's some of it is based in fact. The people are created, but the situation it came from is real. So about a mile from my house is a place called New Ferry. About 8 or 9 years ago, it was blown up in a gas explosion. So somebody kind of blew up their own building for insurance purposes, and it still hasn't been rebuilt. So for many years there was just kind of buildings there, no windows, no roofs, anything like that. It was a wreck. The MP was trying to get money in, the council fudged it. It was just an absolute mess. Um, and around that time, I just kind of had this idea about a guy who loses everything in that explosion. And the only people that will help him out of it are a community group who have very strong right wing links. So it's
Mhm.
will he trade his principles for the help that he needs? How far in can he get? Can he get out once he's in there? So it's got tinges of domestic terror in it and stuff like that. It's not strictly a thriller, maybe a little bit more literary, but there's
Mhm.
a lot of tension and as you'd expect with right wing idiots, there's going to be a lot of horrible things within it as well. Wasn't an easy book to write, and it's probably not an easy book to read, but yeah, I think there's something to that one, and I think it says a lot about where we are as a country in terms of the UK, and
Mhm.
it says a lot about the place where I currently live as well.
Awesome. Definitely looking forward to that, and having it on the shelf with Last Night of Freedom, because yeah, it's got that series design to it, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're gonna look pretty sweet. If you hang on 1 second, well, I might have to cut this. I'll get one and put them side by side. Hold on,
Yeah.
I've got like an ARC copy.
Nice. Nice.
So here we go. So they kind of carry on from each other like
Oh, it
this.
looks so good. Yeah. It's such a good design. You should be really
Yeah,
happy.
yeah, it's great. I mean, as I've said to you, I mean, Paul's fantastic. Like, it's this his kind of brainchild, and to see to get those books delivered in the post and just to see how good they look, it's gratifying. When you work so hard on what goes on inside it, to have somebody
Hmm.
else who cares as much about how it looks is it's a good feeling. It's good partnership, and I'm lucky to have met him really because he does some brilliant work.
Yeah. The reason I knew about Last Night of Freedom was because you had posted it somewhere on social media, picture of the cover, and just the picture of the cover and just the most basic explanation of what the book promises was enough for me to be like, hey, Michael, Dan's got this book coming out. Because Michael David Wilson's our mutual friend.
Yeah, of course.
How do I get in touch with Dan to get in on this? And then he connected us, and here we are. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Yeah, it's good to be speaking to you after so long apart, Rob.
well, it's been a first of all, it's been a pleasure reading the book, and I recommend that everybody, since it'll be available by the time that this episode posts, go find the book, buy the book, and check it out because it is a very fascinating story that got me thinking about a lot of stuff, and it's very, I think, relatable because we've all got a friend group. We've all been through these types of situations. We just hopefully haven't been hunted for sport. But anyway, recommend everybody about. Dan's like, something I have to tell you about my experience with this book. But I want to thank you for taking the time to put this book together and put together something that's really entertaining and compelling. And thanks for friendship over the years. We've known each other quite a while. So, and thanks for taking some time to talk to me about this today.
Yeah, man, it's been great to speak to you, and I'm really grateful for you reaching out and helping me to get word of this book out there. So thanks a lot.